Right, okay, so this is part 2 of your illustration demo, and this one is particularly about faces and features. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do similar to what I did with the figure drawing. I'm going to show you a range of step-by-steps and techniques for drawing faces, but as I did previously, I always find it useful to have guidelines and construction lines to base the features on. So I'm just going to demonstrate that fundamentally the head is an egg, like so. And if we draw a central line right down the middle of the head, the eyes are roughly halfway down the egg. The nose is halfway between the eyes and chin, and then mouth is halfway between nose and chin. So you can see just by doing that you already have the start of a face. Now if you want to change the way that the face is looking, all you need to do is move that central line to the direction that the person is looking. So if they're looking over to the left, again, eyes halfway, nose halfway between eyes and chin, and then mouth halfway between nose and chin. So you can see you've already angled the gaze. If you want them to be looking down, again, start with the central line, but this time I'm going to drop the gaze so it's actually looking down. So if we drop the eye line, nose is still halfway, mouth is still halfway, but already you can see that we've started the semblance of a face. Okay, now if you want some proof of what I've just said, then I'm just going to demonstrate. So as you can see here, we have a beautiful anatomy book, and one of the key things when you're drawing figures, and when you're drawing anything really, is to kind of understand what's inside the clothes in order to understand how the clothes hang or how hair sits or whatever. So this anatomy book is fabulous. So I've got a scale drawing of a skull just there, and if I measure from the eyes to the top of the head and then measure down again, you can see more or less halfway. Okay, tip of nose, almost halfway between eyes and chin, and likewise mouth and chin. So you don't get much stronger evidence than that. So there's your anatomical evidence, but also, just as a little reminder, here's my friend the egg. So you can see that the head is an egg. You can see I've drawn that central construction line on it. You can see that the eyes are virtually halfway down, nose is halfway between eyes and chin, and mouth is halfway between nose and chin. And then if you do the gaze thing, you see if you turn my friend the egg to one side, you can see how that central line moves. So left and right, and then down. Okay, so it's quite easy to demonstrate on a 3D form. What's also easy to see on this demonstration actually is that by making sure that you have the eyes halfway down the head or the egg, it leaves room for the hair, and that's really important. That's something that people often forget about, is the fact that we have quite a lot of skull above our eyes to leave room for the hair. So as you can see, I've had lots of fun with eggs, and here we have one where I've added the hair, so you can see the distance on top of the skull that the hair takes up. Okay, voila. So having got our basics right, I'm going to work in pencil now. Just to start putting features in. So having established that our head is an egg. I'm just going to add some ears on the side, halfway down. Put our construction lines in. Now this is where you start working faintly, because you don't want your construction lines to overshadow the drawing. So I think you can just about see there that we have construction lines in there to give us a reference point. So if I'm going to start filling in now, I'm just going to shadow the tip of the nose and the central opening of the mouth, and shadow the lower lip, and then just shadow away to give a suggestion of a slightly darker top lip. Yeah, so that's all about shadowing rather than drawing outlines. Now if I start to just introduce a little bit of definition, we've got some cheekbones, maybe flatten off the side of the head slightly, and then start to just refine that chin shape. Now I'm drawing here with a 4B pencil. So that's a very soft pencil, and you can see that what I've done is I've varied the pressure as I've been drawing. So I've been able to do very light lines, as construction lines, and then I've started to darken up as I've been drawing. And I think that's really important when you are doing any kind of sketching or drawing, is that you vary the pressure and you don't expect, you know, just one pressure and one pencil to do the whole job. So if we're thinking about eyes, I'm just going to put little marks just to mark the centres of the eyes. Now the important thing with the eye is that the eye is constructed around an eyeball, isn't it? So in setting to that skull eye socket that we've just looked at, we've got an eyeball which has the coloured iris, has the pupil, and then the reason why eyes are shaped in the way that they are is because skin then folds over them, isn't it? So that we've got that top lid which then sits in that eye socket, and we've got the lower lid that sits underneath and often creates a slight bag under the eye. So you can see there that by working with the shape of the eyeball, that again gives you a 3D eye. The important thing is not to make your eyes too big, unless you're doing kind of manga styly drawings, and to make sure that you can't see all of the cornea, because if you can see, rather the iris, if you can see the whole of the iris, it makes people look very startled. So if you draw eyes, like that, it makes people look very frightened. So always try and make sure that you've just got kind of 3/4 of the cornea showing. I mean, if you want to do a kind of a sultry, sort of sexy hooded kind of eye, then you can drop the eyelids even lower, and that creates that kind of effect. And then we just pencil in the eyebrows. So that's your fundamental face. Yeah, and you've got a nice bald head on there. So if we want to draw in some hair, we've got all of this distance between the top of the skull to start drawing in. Drawing in hair. Okay, so that's the fundamental concept for drawing features. I mentioned hair, and just some tips before we go on. When you're drawing noses, just think about shadows. What we don't want to see is that, or Mr. Piggy Nose. Okay, so like I just demonstrated, just think about it as a slight shadow at the tip of the nose, because that's the trick with faces, is that you see them as a series of shadows, and light and dark rather than hard edges. If we're thinking about hair, I'm just going to change pencil to an HB, which is a much lighter one. So I'm going to draw in some eggs to start with, just get some construction lines in. And then what's important is that you start to think about hair not as individual strands, because what we don't want is this, is it, like we often see at junior school when people are learning to draw. So we don't want individual strands. What we want to try and do is identify what the silhouette of the hair is. So if we've got something that's very straight, it might fall in a very kind of straight planes. And then once you've identified the straight planes, you can then start to fill in blocks of colour and highlights. Yeah, and then if you want to separate it, then you can introduce some low lights or some darker elements to soften the silhouette and give it some life. Okay, straight hair. If we're doing curly hair, again, think of the silhouette that the curls will make. So we've got our eyes down there, so we might have a centre part in, so I'm just going to draw the centre part in, and then the curls are going to start from there. And again, it's about shadowing light and dark. Often the hair that you can see at the neck, that you can see kind of through to the back of the hair, is darker than the outer shades. And then if you want to, then you can introduce some darker shaded elements. Okay, now I'm a great fan of not trying to make things up out of your head. I'm a firm believer that drawing from a photograph or drawing from an object is the best way to learn to draw, because then you can really break things down into shapes, silhouettes. You look at other people's styling, because often you don't remember things in the way that they actually are. So it's quite useful to be able to look at something when you're using it, which is why sketchbooks and research, etc., are really useful, because it's not just about collecting visual imagery, it's actually drawing from that visual imagery, and whether it's hair and styling and makeup and details, or whether it's details of costume, button placement, size of buttonholes, the way a revere sits, etc. It's all really useful in terms of being able to develop your own drawing. Now, what I'm going to do now, that's your kind of fundamental for sketching, so I would imagine you're going to run away and have a go at that immediately. But what I'm also going to do now is show you a cheats way for doing features, because someone asked me the other day how you can cheat with features. Okay, so one of my favourite ways is to use photocopies. So what I often do is I might find different pictures from magazines, etc., different faces, different characters, something here from the local paper. So we've got real people, which is really useful in costume, because we're not trying to draw fashion figures necessarily, are we? So having real people to use as a starting point is great. So I often start with photocopies or scans or printouts or whatever, and try and get them as pale as possible. Then what I'll do is I'll stick them down on the page on which I'm working, and then using a very, you see how watery that is? It's a very watery white water and acrylic paint mix. Now it's important to use acrylic paint because what we're going to do is we're going to knock back the photocopy till you can hardly see it, and that then gives you a kind of a template for drawing onto. But one which is still clear enough to be able to see. Now what I'll do is I'll do that in about 4 or 5 layers. So I'll put one layer on, I'll let it dry, then I'll put another layer on. I'll do 3, 4 until it's knocked back quite a lot, until I can just see enough. So here's one I made earlier. Now you can see that we've knocked it back. You can still see it. It's still quite clear, but it's not going to overshadow your drawing. And then what you start to do is then you start to make your own marks. So you use it as a base. You don't even have to copy it directly necessarily. If you wanted to do a more kind of cartoony version, which is the one I'm going to do here, I'm making the eyes slightly bigger to create a slightly more cartoony effect. I'm exaggerating the lips slightly here as well, so it becomes much more my drawing. So then I can start to introduce character and detail, etc. within it. So you see, first step is going over it in your own aesthetic with pencil. And then again, here's another one that I did. So you can see what I've done there is I've started to add watercolour washes onto the photocopy on top of the pencil. I've drawn in a different hairstyle, so you can see the difference between the original hairstyle and the one that I've drawn in. And then I've started to add it to a body. So once I've got to that stage, and watercolour washes are great because you just build them up in delicate layers to allow you to get the effect that you want. I would never recommend using gouache, which I'm using again here, to colour in. It's not about colouring in, it's about adding colour. And then once I've got that, what I would start to do is build up the detail using coloured pencils and working into it. So it's an opportunity again to kind of correct what you've already done. To add colour and build up colour. But again, like I said, it's not about trying to colour in, it's about trying to add shadow. You see we've got some hair there, so we might have a bit of a shadow coming in around the face. I'm just going to add a hint of pink to give us a more natural look. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to leave a little bit bare, which gives you a hint of a highlight. Okay, maybe a hint of pink on the cheek. Okay, and then finally I'm just going to add a little bit of black. Now you need to be careful with black because black can kill everything. It can flatten, it can deaden, so you need to be really selective about where you're using black. So I'm going to add in eyeliner and pupils. Just to bring the eyes out a little bit. But then I'm going to use a really dark brown just to shadow the eyes and just do a bit of work on the hair just to give it some depth. Now I've also added a dark brown wash on the hair before I started, so I've got a base colour to work into. And what I always try and do with hair and skin tones is always try and find a middle tone. Because when you look at fabrics or skin or anything, it's never one colour, is it? It's always got shadows, it's always got highlights. So I always try and find that middle tone, and then I can use a darker pencil or a darker colour to add shadow or low lights. And then I can use a lighter shade just to add in a suggestion of light. Okay, so that's a process that's often quite useful, because, you know, I don't want you to feel like you're cheating, because it's not cheating. You're using a template effectively to create your own response. So that's natural. That's a natural one by my standards. I mean, being as I spend most of my time designing for drag queens and cabaret artists, then that's natural. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to do another version on the same template, just to show you what you can achieve with this. Now I'm just going to do a bit of a Harley Quinn on this one, I think. So we're going to have some pigtails. Now you can see already that the style I'm using for this is much more kind of cartoony. It's much more expressive, and that's because I want this character to be much more manga-y, I suppose. It's not manga because I don't draw in a manga style, but like I said, it allows you to do that slightly more cartoon approach. So I'm going heavier now with my pencils. So using gouache, I'm just going to add in some flesh tones. Now again, I said it's about adding colour, it's not about colouring in. So I'm going to go with the darker shade under the chin, down the side of the face, maybe around the hair, and in the eye socket. So you can see that it's a heavier way of applying colour than the last example. And then I just use a wet brush just to pull the colour across into the rest of the drawing. So I'm just going to add some hair. I'm going to go with a bright yellow hair this time, because Harley Quinn is quite bleachy, cartoony, isn't she? So I'm going to start by adding in some yellow base tones. And then I'm just going to fade in some of the dip dye colour that she has in her hair. There's different colours on both sides, but for the purpose of my exercise, I'm just going to use the same colour. Okay, so once that's dry, again you can start going in with the same technique of kind of adding colour washes. Now I'm going to be a bit more extreme with my colour palette here. And you can see that I'm building up the colour gradually. I'm not trying to get it all done in one go. I'm doing a light layer, then I'm going over it again. I'm creating darker layers as we go. So, then this time I'm going to choose a dark purple for the lip, a lower lip, but this time I am going to leave a very, very definite highlight, so it almost looks like she's got a lip gloss or something on. Okay, how's she looking? Right, and then because this is this is a more kind of cartoony style, what I would start to do is just bring in some highlights and lowlights and shade, etc. into the hair. I mean, obviously, like I said, you would wait for your colour washes to dry before you did this, so that you can, so that the paint doesn't interact with the pencils too much. But then because it's a cartoony style, what I'm going to do is then I'm going to go in with a brush pen. Okay, and I'm using a brush pen in a very kind of loose, expressive style. Again, you have to be really careful with brush pens and with outlining, because you can see I'm not outlining. Because if you outline, what you can do is you can kill something really quickly. So I'm using it to add definition rather than et voila. So you see we've got two very different outcomes from the same face. Yeah. So what's nice about this? I mean, if you work in this scale that I'm working in, so you're working quite big, so you can get detail in. When you've done that, you can always photocopy it, scan it, whatever, reduce it down, and then you can collage it onto your own drawings, so that you can then add a figure or a body to your own drawings. And it works beautifully with all skin tones and all colours. So here I've got a black skin. So again, I've chosen a mid-tone. Which you can then start to work into with a slightly darker tone. And then this time I'm going to use an ochre. Just to add highlights highlights to the skin tone. But then again, you can add colour, building it up gradually. Okay, she's gone a bit kind of Donna Summer Disco Diva, hasn't she? But that's okay. I don't mind that. And then with my black, I'm going to add in some really strong low lights, really, to bring it. Okay, so there you go. And then there's just a few others that I did as a selection for you, so that you can see a variety of imagery. Good, I think that's enough. Okay, thank you.